Hey everyone, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Elizabeth and this is Awaken the Spirit. Today I'm going to be talking to you about tarot decks and oracles. I quite often get asked by people, how do you choose a tarot deck and how do you connect with your decks as well. So I thought I'd go into a little bit about how I personally choose my decks and then also just recommend a few that I really love working with as well. So let's get started. So one thing that I do notice a lot is people asking if you need to be gifted a deck or if you can purchase your own. And you know, it's really a personal choice. Choosing decks is a very personal thing and there's no real right or wrong way to go about it. Some people do get gifted decks and that can give them more of a sacred energy, but at the same time you may feel that if you've been gifted a deck, you don't actually have as much of a connection because it might not be a deck that you ordinarily would choose. With decks, I do feel that there is a little bit of time and effort that you need to spend to choosing a deck. At this point in time, a lot of people are ordering them online and selecting them online. Some opinions will say that you have to get out and touch the deck and feel the deck and have a look at the deck itself before you can choose a deck. Other people will say don't worry about it. For me personally, I do both. So sometimes if I'm in a store and there's decks available, it's really great. Some stores will actually let you, they have sample decks and they'll let you go through the deck itself to get a feel for it, see the images and just really pick up on its energy as well and if it's actually something you connect with. Alternatively, if you're choosing something from online, my biggest suggestion is once you go through a site and look for different decks, I would then suggest if they don't have pictures available for more than a couple of cards, have a look on YouTube or Instagram, Facebook sometimes as well, just to find an unboxing of the deck itself. That way you get an idea of every single card that's in there. It'll give you the ability to look at the images. I use Instagram quite a lot for this because I do love that, you know, people pretty them up even more with the images and that sort of thing, so you get a really good feel for the deck itself. I will also use YouTube for the unboxing so I can see the entire deck and also the guidebook as well, just so that way I'm really confident in whether or not I actually feel that that deck is for me. Now I have a particular theme that I like to go with a lot of my decks. I'm very earth based, so anything that is plant related, flower related, very strong earth energy, I'm more than likely going to be drawn to that kind of deck. The same thing with fae energy, mythical creatures kind of energy and anything witch related as well. So you will start to find that you'll begin to get a theme for the kind of decks that you choose. Another thing that I do is I like to spread the kind of decks out that I have. I like to have decks that will suit any kind of moment and any kind of need. So at the moment I'm still going to be looking for a darker deck. That's something that I haven't found yet. I want a nice dark, deep energy from it. I want it to be very shadow related, and that's still not quite something I've found yet. I've found some that are a little bit along those lines, and I will be searching for the right deck, and sometimes it can take a while before you find one. But I do have decks both in tarot and oracles that will go from, you know, very earthy to very straightforward and to the point. Others will be very cosmic in their theme, water-based decks, all this kind of stuff. And I do find that the reason why I do that is because when I'm doing readings for myself and for other people, I find that you need to have a little bit of versatility with your deck as well, because I intuitively pick my decks for the reading that I'm doing. And I find that having that different energy, that different theme, helps to portray the message even stronger. So the next thing I want to go over is difference between a tarot deck and an oracle deck. Now tarot is very straightforward in the sense that you know that most decks that you pick up, you're going to have the same kind of energy, the same kind of messages coming through. The theme will change a little bit, the messages might change slightly, but the underlying messages for the whole cards will be pretty much the same. So most tarot decks, I say most because there is some that do vary a little bit. They might have less cards, they might omit certain things depending on the theme. But 9 times out of 10 you're going to find that a tarot deck has 78 cards, and these cards will be split into the minor arcana, the major arcana. Major arcana is 21 cards. These are very spiritual based in their messages, more on the grand scheme of things is how I look at it. Messages from your higher self to some degree, and life lessons. And the minor arcana are then again split up into suits, and this is usually pentacles, wands, cups, and swords. So the suits might change slightly depending on the theme of the deck. They might have a different name for it, but there's always going to be your 4 suits, and these are more of your day-to-day energies. You then, within your minor arcana, will have your court cards, is what they're called, and the court cards are going to be usually seen as your page, knight, queen, and king. And this is more often than not, they usually refer to a particular person's energy, or an energy that you yourself need to embody. I'm not going to go into a complete tarot lesson here because I do feel that that needs its own video, and I am going to be doing a longer blog post on this as well. Now with oracle cards are a lot more wider spectrum. So an oracle card can be anything and everything. It can have 40 cards in a deck, it can have 10 cards in a deck. It's really the creator of the deck who has a say in what the oracle is about. And the oracles tend to have a more open-ended message. They are more open to intuitive messages as opposed to the tarot. They quite often are very image-based as well. The images in the cards portray a lot more in general than what, say, a tarot deck would, because the tarot deck's theme is still the same for each sort of card. So you're not going to have too much variation there, whereas oracle decks, the images quite often, more than not, will have a lot more to say than just the particular message of the card. I personally would say when people are starting out with cards and reading cards, I always say try to go with an oracle deck first. Not everyone says this, and the reason why I say that is because it's a good way to practice connecting with your intuition. Even though tarot is more strict and rigid in the way you read it, you still tap into your intuitive abilities to interpret the meaning of the card for the situation. And you can get quite bogged down in learning the cards because there's so many cards to learn. You can get very bogged down in the rigid aspects of it, and it can become almost chore-like when you're learning. As opposed to oracle cards, because they're so much more open to interpretation, you start relying on your intuition more. You become confident in your own personal abilities to read the cards. And this in turn is a lot easier when you then transition to looking at the tarot, in my opinion, in order to interpret the messages that you find in the tarot. So I do suggest oracle first, then tarot, but it really does depend. If you don't have any interest in an oracle card, then that's fine, go straight to the tarot. Myself personally, I went to tarot first, and I was very bogged down in the rigid aspects of it. I had a tarot deck and I had a guidebook that I purchased separately, and spent a lot of time analysing it, and in some ways I actually fought against my intuition. And whatever the meaning was in the book, if I felt something else about the card, I used to fight against it, and that's not something I suggest, because even though messages in the cards are a particular theme, at the end of the day, your connection to the deck and the way you interpret those messages is the ultimate message that you need to give. And I say this even with the tarot. So for a tarot card, one person might get a particular card, and you might get 10 people who say this is the meaning, but for you yourself personally, it might be slightly different. And in some circles of tarot readers, they will say that's wrong. But to me, I don't feel that's wrong at all. I feel that that's you tapping into your intuition. It's the message that's coming through from your higher self to you. And that's the ultimate connection that you need to have. So let's go into connecting with your decks. And this is also going to be a very personal thing for each individual reader. For myself, the first thing I like to do when I get a deck is obviously open it up and go through the cards. I will then give it a shuffle and, just to start connecting my energy into it. I actually have a real funny thing that I don't like to just do a quick shuffle, because I don't find that the cards are shuffled up enough. When you get a new deck, they will be in order of what they are in the guidebook. In Oracle decks, it's not quite as much of an issue for me, but in a tarot deck, I hate that, because to me, I feel that the messages don't come through strongly enough because it's in order, and I don't want it in order. I want that randomness in the deck, because then I feel that the message is more stronger that comes through. So what I usually do is I will do a quick shuffle and I will split the deck. And when I say split the deck, that means, breaking it into piles, and then put it back together, do another quick shuffle, and then what I will usually do is lay it out into like a pile of 6, and I will randomly select from top and the bottom of the cards and lay them out randomly on these piles to try and do a longer shuffle, you could say, and then pop that all back together and then shuffle again. I spend a lot of time shuffling, because to me shuffling is the key way to connect my own energy into the deck. And when I first open the deck and start shuffling, that to me is my way of just introducing myself to the deck and the deck to introduce itself to me. I will then usually draw a couple of cards for myself just to see what comes out. Sometimes they don't always resonate, and that's okay. It's more of a way for me to just see how the messages come through, the energy of the cards, me connecting to the cards. It's kind of like an introduction. It's like the handshake for me of meeting the deck. And then quite often what I will also do is a couple of my close friends who are also readers, because usually as soon as I get a deck, I'll send a photo to them and say, hey, it's arrived. After I've shuffled for myself, I will then say to them, hey, do you want me to pick you a card quickly? And I will then shuffle again to draw for a few other people, just to see how the messages come through in that regard, because it's not connected to me, and see how I connect to the cards and the messages. When I spend time with a new deck, I do use my guidebooks. A lot of people don't, and I don't necessarily use them as much as I used to, but I still do use the guidebooks because I like to understand the energy that the creator of the deck was trying to portray with the messages in the cards. So I will spend time with those decks, and I quite often will use a deck over and over and over. I will use new decks more often than not to do my daily readings on my Facebook page, just so that way I'm using it. I will cycle through different new decks just to start getting that energy and that connection, but I do refer to my guidebooks quite a lot, just so that way I can understand the energy and the connection of the cards. Once I'm confident in how I feel the cards are meant to be portrayed, that's when I'll put the guidebook away. I might still pick it out every now and then just to refresh myself on a card itself, but I will then rely mostly on my intuition. Now, one thing that I feel like it's a quirk for me, but when I get a tarot deck, for example, I actually will go through the tarot deck, and the first card I look for is the Devil card. It sounds funny, I know, but to me, one of my favorite cards in a tarot deck is actually the Devil card, because it's seen as such a negative card. Most people look at it as this evil card, this bad card that's coming in with a bad omen and tricksters and addiction and all this kind of energy. And I look at the Devil card as a very different aspect. It's the shadow self. It's, it's the primal urges. It's, our inner nature that we tend to deny. And I always find that once I find the Devil card and I look at the Devil card, I will then see the image first, see what kind of image is the Devil, and then read the guidebook message from the Devil, because that to me is the way that I understand the complete energy of the deck. If the Devil card in a deck is very negative and very aggressive in its energy, I find that the whole deck has that same kind of energy. So it's such a quirk of me. I will always look for that card first, and I have a real strong connection with decks that have a more poetic way of looking at the Devil. After I've seen that card, I will then flick through to the death card as well, because I do like to see how that is portrayed, because that again is a negative card. And the other cards that I will look for is the Ten of Swords, the Nine of Swords, because those two cards are also seen as quite negative cards, and I like to see how they are portrayed and their messages are portrayed. You can see a theme here. I look for the most negative cards in a tarot deck in order to see how they're portrayed. I will then go to the positive cards that I love, and that is the Empress, the Sun, and the Queen of Pentacles. The reason why I say the Queen of Pentacles is because that is one of the biggest connection cards for me. That's my energy of where I sit, and often portrayed as myself when I see the Queen of Pentacles. So I will always look through the decks for those particular cards to then see the flip side and see how the positive energies are portrayed. And this to me will give me an overall energy and overall theme of the whole entire deck. That's just my quirk. It doesn't mean that I haven't heard of other people who do that yet. So that's another way of me connecting to the deck. Another tip that I would give is, and this is one that I've only really started recently, is actually sleeping with the new deck under my pillow. I don't do it with every single deck. I only do it with particular decks. And the reason why I do this is because I find that it connects to my subconscious energy. It may influence my dreams as well. But I find that it gives me a slightly more intimate connection to that deck, its energy, me connecting my energy to the deck and the deck connecting to me. And I do feel that it's more of a personal aspect too. Most of the decks that I've done this with are decks that I usually reserve for using only for myself instead of using for other people. So that's another quick tip I want to go into as well. Choosing decks for use for I call it the general decks, the general public decks, or personal decks. And 9 times out of 10, most of my decks I'm going to use at some point for other people, but there are some decks that I do reserve only for myself and sometimes for close friends. And the reason why this is because I feel that the messages and the connection of that deck itself was only meant for me. They're more personalized energy, and I do feel that it's just not meant to be shared with other people. So there is some decks that I will have that connection with, and that I feel also makes the connection just a little bit more sacred in that regard. So I do suggest when you start opening your world up with decks, to finding a deck that you're only going to use just for yourself in order to have that sacred connection. So the last little tip I want to say is ultimately just go for it with selecting a deck. There's no right or wrong way. You are most likely going to end up purchasing decks that you probably don't actually enjoy or you don't connect with right away. In that regard, my advice there is to still hold on to them. And the reason why I say this is because there's some decks that I have had for years and I never really touched them. And then one day I've decided I'm going to have another quick play around with this deck and see how I feel, and find that I create a new connection. So trust yourself. If you're buying a deck and you purchase a deck and you think, oh, once you get it, I'm not really that strongly connected to it, that's okay. You will probably end up being connected to it at a later time. So just the ultimate message here is to just go for it. Just purchase your decks. It doesn't matter if it's online. It doesn't matter if you go into a store. Do whatever feels right for you. It's okay to look for advice from other people, but don't take it with a grain of salt. What works for me is not necessarily going to work for you, and the same for other people as well. So ultimately, go for it, choose it, look for advice, look for things that you're connected to. It's really ultimately just finding the kind of decks that you like the images in, you like the style, you like the messages that you might find. When choosing oracle decks, I do suggest choosing stuff that has a little bit of either a prompt word or a message on it. That way when you're working with them, it's easier to start connecting to your intuition because of the prompt word, giving you something to focus on for the overall image, as opposed to having to just rely on your intuition. So that's a key thing that I do find, that a lot of newer people have a little bit of an easier ability to connect to their decks. So now I'm going to get into a couple of my personal favourite decks, and decks that I feel would be good for beginners as well. So I'm going to get into tarot first, because obviously tarot is the main attractor to this path. And the deck I am showing you is the Green Witch Tarot, and this is my favourite go-to tarot deck. This is my everyday deck that I use. It's the deck that I have connected to the most with reading tarot. I did start off with the traditional Rider-Waite deck, which is what most tarot decks are based on, but I started off with a deck that had no real guidebook in it or anything like that. So I do like decks like this because they do come with a guidebook in them as well. And for this deck, I love the energy, I love the messages. I find that the messages are not too intimidating. Like I said, with how I choose decks, I don't like that overall negative energy. And I do feel that it's very easy to use for beginners. It has a lot of information. It brings in things like herbs and stuff into it as well, in order to understand herbs and general life lessons. The next deck that I'm going to show is my Mermaid Tarot. This is a more recent purchase that I had. I did feel like I was going to get a very soft, flowy energy, but the reason why I'm suggesting this one is because even though it has a very similar energy to the traditional tarot, the messages are a little bit more straightforward and to the point. And the guidebook itself has actually got some really great information in there. It's very life-based, and the back of the guidebook, it actually does have ways of connecting with the decks as well, using spells, which is a real cool quirk that I found that I haven't seen in other decks yet. So it's definitely one I recommend. Easy to use, easy to read as well, and the artwork is beautiful. The next one is the Herb Crafter's Tarot. Now this one is not necessarily one I would suggest straight away for a beginner, or if you're looking at maybe not quite so much of a traditional tarot, I would go with this one because it's a very gentle energy. It's very feminine in its approach, and the messages are very gentle, but the reason why I'm bringing this one in is because the everyday messages that are coming through from this are extremely positive. They're very proactive in being able to heal, and not just give you the message and then not give you anything to go with it as well. So I do feel that that's a very good deck to connect to. It's very strongly connected. I mean, it's called the Herb Crafter's Tarot. Very strongly connected to herbs, so it's got a lot of knowledge there as well from the herbal aspect. So for anyone who's wanting to work with that plant energy, the perfect deck. And if you're wanting a more unique, slightly quirkier deck with very strong messages but gentle messages, it's the perfect deck for you. The Hidden Realm Tarot is another new one for me that I have picked. The artwork is absolutely stunning, and the reason why I've suggested this one is because it does stay to that traditional tarot messages, but it's very gentle. It's very, again, that proactive kind of messages, and it's not quite as negative as well. It looks at life from a very different perspective. So the messages that come through from these cards are not intimidating, and the reason why I say this with most decks is because I don't feel that the intimidating energy, especially for people who are starting out, is necessarily the best thing. You know, you don't want to be shuffling cards and have that, oh my god, I can't believe this card has come out, feeling with lots of cards. You want to be able to understand the cards and go, okay, it's not such a horrible message, it's not such a fearful message, and all of these decks that I'm showing don't have that fear factor behind any of the cards, and that's why I feel for people beginning, it's a lot more of a gentle way to come into the art of reading tarot. A new one for me, It's the Everyday Witch Oracle. I have recently done an unboxing of this one as well, so I will link that below. But this is just it's exactly that, an everyday tarot deck. The messages are very straightforward, very proactive in their messages as well. They give you something to think about with the actual card meaning itself. The artwork is really relatable to some degree. It's just a very gentle, soft deck. So that's the tarot decks. That is by no means the only selection of tarot cards that I have. I've got a lot more, but these are the main ones that I do feel that I connect to, and I do feel that are really good ones for beginners as well. Well, I know this was a little bit longer than I expected it to be, but I do hope that this has given you some food for thought in regards to connecting with tarot decks and choosing your own tarot and oracle decks. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because I will be doing more how-to videos and information on spiritual stuff, as well as my weekly tarot that I do, tarot readings and the collective readings as well. So thank you for watching and enjoy your day. Love and light. Bye.